Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, leading publishers of books, directories, educational guides and magazines aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. Enjoy the podcast.
Good morning and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. You're listening live to the Sunday Social. We're just going to invite Omer in to speak. Today's show is all about SLANT, engaging minds or mandatory listening. A big shout out, of course, to our sponsors, John Catt Educational. But for now, let's hand over to Omer. Good morning.
Good morning and welcome to the Sunday Social. Here today, we are talking about the very interesting conversation of SLANT. And the question is it engaging learning or mandatory listening? Okay, all right. So my experience of SLANT, I actually do work in a school where SLANT is part of the whole school culture. So we use SLANT in every single class, every single lesson. And I do personally find that it does help with engaging learning. I do find that it does support the learning needs of the students. They're able to focus. It builds up a proactive behavior in the class. And so I'm not truly against the idea of SLANT. In my opinion, it's a fantastic tool that's used. It promotes respectful communication. It can be used across all levels of students, from the super high achievers to ones that may not be the highest achievers as well. It means that they are focused on what I'm saying. Anyone that's here, if you wish to talk on the pros and cons of SLANT, remember that you can request to join as a speaker in this conversation. Now, what does SLANT actually stand for those of you that do not know? Once again, it was introduced by Doug Lemoff in the book Teach Like a Champion. The S stands for sit up straight. The L stands for listen actively. The A is ask and answer questions. N is nod and show interest. And T is track the speaker. Now, some people do believe that SLANT can be too rigid and also that it does not work for all students. Please, if you have something you want to say, if you want to share, now's your chance. Request to join as speaker. We have David here. Now, David, for those of you that don't know, David is from the north of England. He was formerly a middle leader at a comprehensive school in England with over 2,000 students, and he now teaches in a day 6, or also known as an alternative provision. Welcome, David.
Hi there. Sorry about I didn't join on a mobile. I'm sorry for that.
That's fine, but we've made it now. Can you tell us a bit about your background and experience in education?
Yeah, of course. So prior to retraining in education, I had a range of different jobs in a number of different sectors and stumbled into lecturing at university where I loved education, trained as a teacher, and as you said, started working at a large comprehensive in the north of England, 2,000 students. And we set up an on-site alternative provision at that school. I helped with part of the teaching in that, and I found that the most rewarding part. And just this year I've joined day 6 provision. So that's when students are permanently excluded. It's that allowance for within 6 days they need to be given an education offer. So we're teaching permanently excluded students from all key stage 3 within a certain council district.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Really, really interesting there. I could imagine there could be some big challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered in the classroom, and how do you address them?
So I think a lot of them have massively low confidence and low self-esteem, and that's demonstrated in a lot of ways. So a lot of it is through the acting out. You see, there's a lot of undiagnosed needs. So we do end up sending a lot on neuro pathways to get diagnosis for autism, ADHD, get them started on the EHCP route, because it's been missed in early years and through their early time at secondary school. And the biggest challenge really is just, I guess, treating every student as an individual and giving that bespoke thing, which, to be fair, you can do in a smaller school like we are much more easily than in a 2000 school. But I do strongly think that there are some of the techniques we use that would be much more applicable in a mainstream setting.
Okay, fantastic. Now, we are here to talk about SLANT. I have just introduced SLANT. Once again, for those people that had missed it, it's a technique introduced by Doug Lemoff. It's about sitting up straight. S stands for sitting up straight. L stands for listening actively. A, ask and answer questions. N, nod and show interest. And T, track the speaker. Now, I'm to believe that you are a SLANT skeptic. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything that you said it does, I'm not going to dispute because you're doing it in the classroom.
Yeah.
But I think the concerns that I have are about some of the potentially unseen in the classroom knock-on impacts that can have. So really, there's two major concerns that I have with it. One is superficial compliance, which is that we get students who are following it in the classroom and in school to get an easy life, to get through it, but we're not making a transformation in that young person's life. They're not buying into it in their life. They're just buying into it on a surface level to get through school.
Yeah, I think that could be a fair point. I mean, when I first started working at this school, I thought it was quite extreme when I started, but it has grown on me as a tool because students, they are engaged when they're listening. I just want to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
Have you observed a classroom where the slant technique is being used? And if so, what do you notice about the behavior and the environment of that class?
So I've not observed it where slant has been used per se. I've seen similar techniques that are, from my understanding, from the Teach Like a Champion stuff in certain classrooms, and I totally accept what is being said in terms of what is going on in the classroom. That I'm not going to dispute. I think there's people with expertise. So if people say students are on task, students are quite respectful, all of those things, I'm not here to dispute that at all.
Yeah.
One thing, just in terms of this superficial compliance, what I did was I took some crime stats. So I looked at antisocial behaviour in areas surrounding SLANT schools and in areas surrounding restorative practice schools. So within a 1 mile radius of the school. Obviously, it's correlation, not causation, but I found it interesting. So obviously, very famous school in Wembley with strict behaviour policies, which I know uses SLANT, open since 2011. Now, these stats are taken in a 5-year period from 2015 to 2019. So this is after ASBOs were repealed, so a change in reporting style of antisocial behaviour, and up to the start of the pandemic, because COVID breaches were wrapped up in reporting for antisocial behaviour. So it just clouds it, so it wouldn't be a fair judgment. But that strict school in Wembley had a 19% rise in antisocial behaviour within the local area, within 1 mile of that school over those 5 years. Another school in London, I don't want to use names, but I can provide the stats on request, no problem. So a 0% rise in antisocial behaviour, so it stayed flat across the 5 years. But then to look at a couple of secondary schools that use restorative practice, so the secondary school in Corby in Northamptonshire saw a 19% drop in antisocial behaviour in the 1 mile around the school. Secondary school in Leeds saw a 30% drop in antisocial behaviour in the 1 mile. And its sister school, also in Leeds, but on the other side, saw a 24% drop in antisocial behaviour in the 1 mile around. So again, I acknowledge it's correlation, not causation, but it's an interesting correlation that I would say warrants a further look into, and on the surface would support this idea of superficial compliance, that what we're seeing in the classroom isn't transforming them outside of the building.
So once again, just to kind of understand the point that you're making here, you're saying that you believe that students, when they do slant in the classroom, they just comply superficially just at that moment, but actually when it comes to developing habits that they need for the greater society, your argument is that actually maybe it's not performing in that aspect and actually might be a hindrance. Is that the argument that you're making?
Absolutely. And I think that, in any workplace outside of education, employees don't use slant. It's not a life skill. I think it is to make, and it appears that it's to make the teacher's life easier, because classroom control is clearly there. You can deliver the learning, but I believe that education is a holistic thing. It's not just, can we get the lesson content, can we get them this paper qualification? It's how can we holistically make these students ready for the real world?
Okay, and just to kind of, I'm gonna obviously have to play devil's advocate here.
Of course.
On the other side, some people would argue that actually it does prepare students for the real world because, when you're at work, if you're talking to your boss, if you're in a team meeting, those skills that are developed by slant, let's say track the speaker, you're not fiddling with something, your attention is fully devoted to that person talking, actually can be good life skills to gain in those very formal meetings that you could have in the future. What would you say back to that?
I think that for small bursts, I can see that being a useful skill. I'm gonna, with the caveat that I'll come on to later about neurodiversity and things, which I think can also be overlooked. But just taking it as read, yes, there are situations where that could be socially more acceptable. But those kind of meetings aren't from 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon, hour after hour after hour. So would it be worthwhile having that in an assembly, in a lesson, during a tutor time? Okay, maybe I can get on board, but every single lesson, I don't think that is a realistic view of the world.
Okay. You spoke about restorative practice, and I'm really interested. What do you actually mean by the term restorative practice?
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
So there are a few different ways of looking at it. So in the main, I'll use the nurture definition, which is that we look at how the child's behavior should be understood developmentally. So each child is at a different point and a different pace of development. The fact that in the same classroom we can have somebody who is essentially a year older, born 1st September, and someone else born 31st of August the following year, there is a differential there in maturity and development and growth. And this idea that we can treat them identically, I think is, on the surface, farcical. I think also there's all behavior is communication. So when a child acts in a certain way, they are communicating a need. Now, sometimes that need is for discipline. And I think that's something that I think mainstream, including myself early in my career, would balk at, that idea that are we just saying that every child who's behaving badly has a problem we need to fix? No, sometimes it is that student needs more boundaries and more discipline. But I also think sometimes mainstream can go completely the other way and say every behavioural outburst needs response of discipline and treating as a behavioural problem rather than a communication of a need that they don't have the emotional language to discuss.
Okay, that's a fair point. I think one of the arguments someone might make is actually so you've got a class of, let's say, 30 students, a full class, and you've got one or two students that's having these behavioral outbursts. How would you tackle that type of situation? Because if you're having one or two low-level disruptions into the class, that actually can have an impact on all the students in that class. So what would you say in terms of the restorative practice? What would you say you would do in that kind of situation there to support that teacher?
So the ideal situation is that you would have a senior leadership team and a middle leadership team who are able to pick students up in a very fast on-call system, because removing that child from the situation, that allows easy access for a disclosure maybe. It allows that student to be removed to stop disrupting the rest of the lesson, but then also do a bit of a triage to work out, is this student needing to vent something? Is there a genuine problem, or is it this student needs to have that discipline? And there is no one in a better position to do that than a member of a leadership team to be able to do that. And I think once you are building up those relationships with students, once there is a trust there, a lot of the badly behaving students do respond to that. And it does take time and it does take effort, and I don't think it's this, make up a handshake for everybody at the door that we might see on social media. But if a child genuinely believes that you care and have their best interests, and the best way to do that is by genuinely caring and wanting their best interests, because students are attuned to that. They can see the teachers that really deeply care and those who, frankly, and there are some in schools who just treat it as a job. Then I think that those relationships do build, and that low level behavior drops as they respond to what you are putting out. And I don't think you can fake that. I don't think you can fake that through pretending to put a smile on and pretending to care, but I also don't think you can fake it through a stringent, strict behavior management program that enforces it.
Okay, so I see that argument there, but again, my question to you is, so I'll relate it back to my school. Obviously, my school does use SLANT, but we also have restorative practice in place. So after the lesson, if you've sent a student out of the class, you're then set to have a restorative conversation with that student, to kind of refocus that attention back to the learning. Do you not think that there is room for there to be restorative practice and SLANT in the same school?
So that goes on to kind of a wider societal question, which I think I'm going to touch on the prison system there, which is that I don't know if you can truly have a punitive and restorative conversation alongside each other. And I think we see that in the prison system in terms of recidivism after release. And I think a lot of the time we do see those same students breaking those same rules over and over again. And there are some students for whom having a level of strictness in the school, they will comply because that is what they do. But there are some students who do rack up those internal exclusions, external exclusions over and over because they can't meet that level. And so I don't believe personally that conversation can truly be restorative, because we are not then giving, they still, or a group of them still don't have the societal tools, don't have that ability to meet what we are asking them to do. So we haven't restored anything, I think. So in terms of language, we know from research that students from certain backgrounds are exposed to fewer words from reading, from their parents reading to them, and that their vocabulary is lower. We also separately know that people with a higher vocabulary are much better at expressing and processing emotions. Research has shown us that as well. But in education, we very rarely draw that link that these students who have a low vocabulary also lack those emotional tools to deal with things because of that low vocabulary.
Okay, I'm just going to take a minute here to just to tell you that this is just general for the audience, that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education, a leading producer of books, directories, educational guides, and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. So I'm going to draw it back to SLANT again. So we've
Yeah,
kind
sorry.
of gone a bit wide there. By the way, I just want to also mention to the people that are listening here today that if you want to join the conversation, you can feel free. Just send a request to join as a speaker. Now, I'm going to pose you another question again. Some educators argue that SLANT can stifle creativity and independent thinking in students by promoting a rigid set of classroom behaviours. How do you respond to this argument, and how do you promote independent thinking in your own classroom?
So, from my perspective, I think that there is a potential of that for SLANT. I think, as mentioned before, I've not been in a SLANT classroom, and I think that you, as a SLANT user, would be better placed to say whether you feel it does stifle that creativity. I'll respond slightly to the second one. For me, the creativity is through the spontaneity. I think that for me, lesson planning isn't a minute to minute thing. It is a where do I want to get to, and then using the students to draw out different perspectives. And sometimes we end up somewhere else than my original intended outcome, but often it's been more valuable for the students because I've responded to what they're interested in related to the subject, like a field with fences around the outside. They can play in the field as much as they want. When we get to those edges where we're totally off topic, I bring us back in again. I totally accept that's much easier in a classroom with 6 or 7 students than a class of 30.
Yeah.
But that would be my perspective on getting the creativity in my setting. But I guess I'd ask you, how do you feel that the spontaneity or that freedom for expression is in SLANT?
I think personally the spontaneity and freedom of expression kind of comes down to, number one, when you're planning your lessons, how much have you planned in the idea that you want students to think? I think that kind of ties into, by the questions that you ask. So obviously you have the questions orientated around, let's say, your tier 3. I'm a science teacher, for example, so I might have my questions orientated around tier 3 vocab, but also during that lesson, I want students to think. I might set them a scenario where I want them to think, and I can do turn and talk. I can do cold calling after, let's say, giving them thinking time. So I think that's how, even in a SLANT classroom, I wouldn't argue that it stifles creativity. I would argue you just have to really think about the format of how you're trying to get students to think independently in that classroom. We do have another speaker here, Mr. Zaman. Did you have something you wanted to say on the topic?
Yes, thank you for letting me in. It's very interesting actually listening to your presentation, both of you. And I know it's a much discussed about subject. And I think for me, I think sometimes we could get carried away from speaking to colleagues in different schools. I think the word slant, it has this funny distaste to a lot of people. And I think if we get away from the acronym SLANT, perhaps I can see some questions being asked what does SLANT stand for. I'm not sure, Omer, if you've explained, sitting up straight, listening attentively, asking or answering question, never interrupting, and tracking the speaker. It's an acronym often used by many schools, taken from the Uncommon Schools practice in America, which sort of expects students to develop the pro-social behavior for active listening, respectful engagement, participation, and being inclusive, about the whole participation, positive role modeling, and so on and so forth. I think if you get away from that, the question ultimately we should be asking is, what do we want children to do in the classroom when the adult is addressing them? And if we can answer that question, I think whether you SLANT or another cue, I think that hopefully there will be an agreement. So the last time someone said, we don't want to use SLANT because it takes away, a number of reasons that you were discussing. My question thrown back at them was simply, okay, when a adult in the classroom wants to address, say, 30 students in the class, or 25 students in the class, or indeed 10 students in the class, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to multitask? Do you want them to, will we accept low-level disruption? or do we want them to listen to the instruction, listen to the explanation? And the last point about being creative, and I think all of us, we agree, we want our children to be creative, our students in the classroom. But then again, how are we equipping them to be creative? If we're not imparting knowledge, and if they're not listening to us and taking on important things that we are asking them to take note of, how can they then afterward be creative in the way they do things? So I think SLANT is very important for us and for our organization. For example, in the Community Schools Trust is something that we have implemented over the last few years. And one thing I would say is that it has transformed behavior in all our schools. And we've got, a small trust. We've got about 6 schools at the moment. And just by using SLANT, we have pretty much eliminated the low-level disruption that we used to see. And we used to accept, frankly speaking. Because my question to any teachers who teach a class, and when I go into the classroom and I see that they are talking, but I see 1 or even 2 students who are multitasking or not listening, looking on the ground or maybe writing something, and they're explaining something so important. The question I'm asking is very simple. Are they listening to you? And what do you think is going to happen when they're going to do the task, or when they will do the all-important exercise that will follow after your explanation? So it's about expectation as well.
Oh, thank you very much for that. David, do you have a response?
Yeah, I think I totally take on board your point that I think that when the teacher is needing to deliver important instructions, we do want the students to listen. I think my main issue with SLANT is that it isn't taking into account that some people don't listen in the same way as others. So some people do have, I'm going to go with neurodiversity just because that's a specialism. I've got 2 children with neurodiversity. I've taught with a lot of neurodiverse students. So the particular things that I take issue with are the sit up and the tracking the speaker. The sitting up part, there are students who stim as part of their neurodiversity. Stimming is where you do a repetitive action in order to alleviate tension, and often well, I don't want to generalize, because again, one of my big things is every student is an individual and should be treated as such, and generalizing for neurodiverse students isn't something that I want to do either. But there are commonalities that is in the literature. Stimming, such as either fiddling with a pen or tapping a leg or moving, can be a way of alleviating the tension and stress that comes from suddenly having to be silent and the expectation that's put on that student. Similarly, the tracking the teacher, it's well known. One of the things that a lot of neurodiverse people struggle with is eye contact, and that tracking the speaker can actually be there's some research from a couple of years ago that shows that actually what it can do is produce an abnormally high activity. This is from 2017, abnormally high activity in the amygdala. So it shows a heightened response, fight or flight response, when forced to track a speaker and track the eyes of somebody. And so what we're doing is forcing these students to mask that. We're forcing them to hide that, to push that down. And again, the masking that a lot of neurodiverse people discuss and talk about, and we've done research into, causes heightened mental health problems, heightened rate of suicide in adults through those requirements to mask. So my issue isn't getting people to listen, it is the methods we use to get the students to listen.
Okay, I'm just gonna just say again. So here, Let Us Communicate has written the comment that says, how does SLANT work for CYP diagnosed with special needs such as ASD, dyspraxia, and sensory processing disorder? Now, I have students in my class that do have SEND, and one of these students have ADHD. And the way that I've found that I incorporate that with SLANT is that I gave that student a fidget toy. Now, I think it depends on how rigidly you see a school using the system. I don't personally think there's any issue with that student having a fidget toy if I need to differentiate for that student's need. I think that's another argument of slant. I think maybe it depends on how kind of rigid you are in the use of it. Um, so, um, Mr. Zaman, did you have a comment to say back to
Yeah, I
that?
mean, just as a last point, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we've got to be inclusive in the classroom, and I think good teachers, great teachers, we have various data on students and their sort of difficulties and challenges they might face. So I think if there are particular students in there who might require your special attention or they're exception to the norm, fair enough. You need to consider that. That's with anything that we do in the classroom. But I think these are exception to the norm. And a lot of us who work in a school, in a large school setting, we know what goes in the classroom. And I think what we're trying to address here is that what exactly do we do as adults when we want them to listen to us in the classroom? I mean, if you look at the amount of time that gets wasted because of low-level disruption, and I'm not even going near some of the high-level disruption that we probably see in some schools. One of the schools we went to, for example, we took over around about 5, 6 years ago. Frankly speaking, the corridor, the classroom, students weren't learning. It was highly dangerous. And the disruption in learning, if you accumulate the minutes and the hours lost in learning over the years, is mind-boggling. It's only when we adopted the protocol of SLANT, if you like, and had a high expectation for the students to listen, we suddenly see now students are indeed learning more, and therefore they're making progress more. And we're making life, the fact that we are addressing behavior in the classroom for them to learn, has changed a lot of those students' lives. Now they're getting better results, and they're going into better colleges and hopefully universities and other forms of employment. Now, with regards to students who may find difficulties in receiving instruction, we need to cater for that. That's a good argument to be made, but these are exception to the norm.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to again, David, throw that back at you. How do we respond? How do you respond? Sorry, to the removal of low level disruption. Shafiq has said actually he finds that we're able to remove in the schools that he works with. He's able to almost completely remove low level disruption in the classroom. How do you respond to that? What strategies do you believe could be used in that particular situation if you're not using slant?
So my read on it is, as you alluded to before, SLANT comes from Teach Like a Champion, Doug Lemov, and I think that there's two ideologically opposed perspectives. I think a lot of Teach Like a Champion is about you are the controller of the classroom and your role is to lead the students. You're in charge. You are the one who they need to respect as the leader of the classroom. That's what a lot of the techniques are kind of pushing towards, and I would argue that SLANT falls into that. It's I say you do this, you comply with that. That I accept the adjustments, which is great to hear. However, I think that the flip of that, the reverse of that, is saying that the students, we are lifting them up. We are, as teachers, are saying we're not better than you. We are here, which I'm not saying that you're saying through SLANT and Teach Like a Champion, but I think that can be what can be interpreted internally by the students. We're lifting you up, and we are finding ways that we can connect with you as a human and recognize you as a person and meet that need individually, which is harder in a class of 30, but still possible. So in terms of behavior management, it is through allowing the students to see that respect that you have from them, allowing students to feel able to ask questions. Not sometimes they shout out. Sometimes some of my students have had issues shouting out, but I always take that question, and instead of refusing to answer it because they've shouted out, I say next time, don't shout out, please raise your hand or whatever, but also answer that question, go with them on that journey. And I think that some I don't believe that every minute of every lesson needs to be towards giving that student progress within the lesson. I think that there is room. These are still young people understanding their role in the world. So at my mainstream, I taught computer science, and sometimes they'd ask about something that happened in the news. And going on that journey actually helps them understand that you are interrelating with them, that you're not this alien, and that you can support them in that understanding. And I found that actually low level behavior issues were minimal by the first half term in. And when there were issues, as I've said, having a good SLT who support you in removing somebody who is producing excessive disruption to do that intervention, to work out what's going on there, also supports that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I again do just want to say to the people, we've got many people listening today. If you do want to join us as a speaker, just send a request and we will add you in. Now, going back to, so obviously, once again, I use SLANT in my classrooms, and I find actually that, what helps with behavior management is if you want to try and build, positive relations, is establishing, one of the main things is you establish what's the norms around your class. What is the norms? What are the boundaries? I would say, if straight away off the bat, my norms and boundaries is that we slant in this class. I find that actually it doesn't tend to be a major issue in terms of behavior. Once you get past maybe the first week and you've had your restorative conversation, you've spoken to that student, you've said to them, okay, this is how it is in the classroom, because we're orientated around the learning and we're centered around the learning. And if I communicate kindness in the way that I speak, but I'm assertive but warm, the Bill Rogers kind of approach to behavior, where I am the adult in the room. It doesn't tarnish that relationship that I have with the students. I think it comes down to how you kind of portray that to the students in the classroom. If you come and you use this slant as a draconian method to be authoritarian in the class, and you're not establishing those, you're not doing the normal things that you need to do to establish those norms, establish the expectations in your class, then actually you might find that if you use slant or didn't use slant, you'll still have the same type of issues. It's just slant could be seen as more authoritarian if you don't have a teacher that is good at just a general kind of building positive relationships in the class. So my argument is I build very good relationships with my student, very positive relationships. Maybe an argument is that because my whole school culture uses slant, that helps. Maybe if I was in a school that I was the only teacher in that school that used slant, it would be more difficult. But again, with building good behavior management in the class, having a good signal is really important. Having a cue for the students that actually now's the time that you need to pay attention is really important at getting that attention very quickly. So, what strategies would you have for someone in that regard? Because I would argue, number one, that it is possible to build positive relationships. You just have to, again, you want to establish the norms, which I do with my slant. I want to communicate kindness, which I do with I just do in the way I talk. I don't really come in and I do see every student as an individual. And I would never come to a student and just like be rude for the sake of being rude. I guess you could argue that in a system with slant that is possible, but I don't do that. And I find that I build good relationships even though I am building slant. So my question to you is, if taken from my experience, do you think that it's possible to build good relationships with students if you do have slant? And number two, I've actually forgot my second question, but I'll come back to it in a second. What do you think about that? So I do believe that it is possible, just by the language that you use and positively framing things and establishing the routines, it is possible to develop good relationships and positive relationships with the students.
Firstly, all of that's wonderful to hear. And I think any teacher who works hard to build those positive relationships is doing their best to be a good teacher, regardless of what techniques they're using. One question I'd have before I fully answer that: when your students are on a task, are they allowed to talk with each other? Or is it silent working or slant? Or how does your classroom feel between tasks?
Okay, so if I front load every instruction that I give. So if my means of participation is that I want students to talk, then they will have that chance to talk. And there are times through the lesson that there are turn and talk activities or work in a group activities that are that orientate around the way my lesson is. You know, if I think it's a higher order question or I want the students to communicate, you know, their answers to each other, then that is their chance to talk. However, if I get to like an end of the lesson, I have like an extended independent task, and during that independence task, the expectation is that they don't talk to the students next to them, because I want to know what they're actually able to achieve on their own. I think that kind of comes down to how I front load the instruction. You know, there are times when they can talk, but there are also extended periods when they're not supposed to talk. If they have something to say, their hand goes up. You know, that's how it is in my class.
That's good to know, that just for the context. So thank you. I think my my belief is that just as every student is an individual, every teacher is an individual, and I think every teacher's personality is different. So for me, in capturing the attention of a class and keeping it, I use a lot of voice modulation, or at least did it mainstream. So being very quiet for one word, then really elevated volume for another, and that modulation helps break it up for students, and I found that worked really well for me. And I think that one of my concerns with SLANT, especially across a whole school, is I do think it removes some of that individual leeway for teachers to use their personality, to use one of their biggest strengths as a teacher in the way that they communicate with the students. And I think it sounds like you found a perfect blend for your classroom of here is a baseline level of what I expect in the classroom, but I've got the warmth. I bring that with me, and if that works for you in your classroom, fantastic. My extended concern is that that isn't me. That isn't how I would build relationships. I can't fake that. I couldn't use that slant as a behavior management, especially as written. I do appreciate people are making the exceptions and so on, but I couldn't use that and still be a good teacher because I'm cutting my hamstrings at the start of the race. I can't do that. I've got a lot of neurodiverse traits. I need the buoyancy. I need the rhythm that I can get through a bit of spontaneity, which from the sounds of it, it doesn't offer. Whereas I think other people would never be able to do what I do in a classroom because they need more structure. They need, and I don't think either is wrong. And I think the reason why I've been so vocal about slant, and I think what you saw and hence invited me on, is that there is this thing of slant is everyone should be using slant. That's what I've seen as the discourse, and I really want to push back against that. If it works for you in your classroom, great. I stand by my concerns about the superficial compliance and how it might have a knock-on impact in the community. I stand by my concerns about the damage it can cause to neurodiverse people, but I'm not in your classroom, so I can't judge that. But it's that this school is going to do it across the board. Teachers don't have any discretion for how they manage behaviour within their room. I think that's an issue.
Okay, and I take that on board, but again, I posed to you the kind of idea that in my school, everyone uses slant, and I think that's what allows it to be easier for me to use as a tool. Whereas if it was just me using it in that class on my own, I would argue that actually, I believe actually I would struggle so much more, because for students they're like, wow, this is crazy. Like, it's not part of the school culture, and therefore actually if teachers did want to use it on their own, they'll struggle. I think
Yeah,
Shafiq has something to say here.
yeah, Omar, I'm sorry, I was I couldn't hear a lot of the discussion because of some technical issue, but I think I got the gist of your last point. If you can hear me, I think this
Hmm.
is a very, very important point. I think one of the things we want to establish with our students, with young people in general, is good habits. Okay, so we talked about the benefits of pro-social behavior. A lot of our students do not know how to listen. They don't, they how to be respectful to the adults who speak to them in the classroom when they're meant to be listening. So it's when you have an approach, whole school approach to establishing a behavior that is conducive to an effective learning environment. Essentially, what you're doing is that you're making everyone else's life very easy. So often we get comments by agency teachers who sometimes come and teach in our school. They're often surprised with the behavior. And we tell them, look, if you want their attention, just give them the cue. 3, 2, 1, slant. It means that they will listen to you, okay, without fidgeting. So when they do use those cues, they're often surprised compared to how students might treat them elsewhere in a different school, for example. So I agree with you 100% that actually we are helping each other in different classrooms. On all of us, we do the same thing. In this case, giving the students a cue for them to listen when they're meant to be listening and learn a very important knowledge we're trying to impart. And we are actually making teachers' life easy because then they can focus really on what they need to do the most in terms of imparting knowledge, important knowledge, without unnecessary distraction.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, and I think again it comes down to if the concern is positive relationships. Once again, this certainly establishes the norms across the whole school, and which is very important for building positive relationships. And I think maybe it comes down to again that teacher. Are they communicating kindness in the way they speak? Even if they are using slant, are they communicating kindness? Are they learning names? Are they combining assertiveness, sorry, with warmth? Are they the adult in that room? I think taking away the positive relationships that you would build in the class, it that's dependent on the teacher. Have they gained the CPD for that?
Yeah, Omer, can I just come in here? I think you're right. And again, I visit a lot of classrooms. Part of what I do is I'm very, very interested in the progress our students are making in the classroom, because to me, the main focus is learning, nothing else. In education, there's lots of discussion about how best to approach learning in the classroom, and I'm fine with that. There's more than one way of skinning a cat, if you like. But every school, they make a decision, and it seems like the debate here is about how do we get our students to engage. Whatever you adopt, the main question is, okay, is it working, and how do we know? So it's part of what I do is when I do visit a lot of classrooms, and you would know, and I see that actually it isn't one of those things that students either like or dislike. I think after a while they get used to it. It's a trigger. It's a trigger for them to listen. And great teachers, they carry with them great personalities. They are warm, but they are strict. Okay, children know that they are the authority in the classroom, and they also understand the expectation is that they need to focus in learning and not anything else. And I think that's the gist of the spirit of what we're discussing here, aren't we? And going back to my first point is that if you don't want to use the Q 3 to 1 slant, you do something else, but make sure students know when they should listen to and when not. We should be in the control of the pace of learning in the classroom, and not the other way around.
Okay, I actually do have a question for you, Shov. It says so you've said that you could tell that slant is effective. Other than the removal of low level disruption, how do you measure the effectiveness of slant in the classroom? Like, what data do you use to evaluate the impact on student learning?
Right. So there's a number of ways you can do that. It's a very good question. So if I go into a lesson, depending on when I go in, first of all, what are the telltale signs of children learning in the classroom? First of all, say imagine that the teacher is introducing the lesson. Okay, so we have a framework. We got, if you like, 5 distinct phases of the framework. Great start with the lesson where we expect our teachers to explicitly reconnect what the students have learned previously. The next phase is introducing knowledge in bite size. Again, this is where we expect to see students paying attention, not disrupting or not doing anything else. Okay, and the teacher can have that interaction, but the teacher will lead that. They will decide when to have that interaction, not the other way around. Then you have modeling, because children need to see what a good one looks like. Okay, the I do, the we do, and the you do. So initially, the I do bit is when the teacher, for example, demonstrates something without any interruption. The we do bit is when they collaborate. So when you scaffold the problem with the students, so you take them with you and you learn together. And then the you do bit is when the teacher is expecting for the students to be a bit more independent before moving on to the phase 4, which is the share a lot of practice, independent practice from the students when the teachers go around to see if indeed students are learning and students are consolidating and practicing their learning. So checking for understanding is done throughout. So depending on when we do go into the lesson, we can unpick A, the environment of that learning, whether or not it's conducive, and B, certainly if I go into phase 4, I would expect to see lots of work being done as a result. Whereas, as opposed to, for example, if I walk into a modeling phase and the teacher is trying to model a very, very important sort of waggle, what a good one looks like, but then you see in the classroom, there's 5 students who are speaking among themselves, albeit quietly, or 2 of them are twiddling their thumb, and then maybe 10 of them listening attentively. Now you've got a situation where you've got a lot of things going on. Not everyone's listening. So you can imagine the progress or the lack of progress by certainly those students who are not listening that they might be making in the classroom. But ultimately, the ultimate measure of progress is what's in the book, right, at the end. And I've seen where even that has been disrupted because children almost immediately put their hand up asking, "Sir, what do I do?" We've all been there, right? And one of the main reasons why they say, "Sir, what do I do?" or "Miss, what do I do?" is because they haven't been listening in the first place. Right. So ultimately, the measure of impact, I would say, is how much work they produce, assuming that the work is challenging, is appropriate and relevant to begin with, and then finally, of course, is the result they get at the end of the day. It's the grades they get. We shouldn't be shy of speaking about the result and progress, because in education, one of the best way we could equip our children is giving them the best possible result.
And do you feel that actually by using SLANT in the classroom, this has an impact on the results that you get?
100%. So I'll give you one example. One of the schools that belong to our trust, Cumberland Community School, is in Newham. In 2019, I think their progress rate was, I think it was minus 0.447, close to minus half a grade compared to national. We subsequently addressed a number of things. One of the first things we've addressed is the learning environment. Okay, we wanted our students to listen and learn in the classroom. We minimized low-level disruption significantly. Then we had the COVID year, and we know the disruption that brought forward. But despite the 2 years of COVID, last year our result is a positive progress of 0.6, which is a significant and phenomenal improvement. So that's the impact. But whereas previously the schools struggled with getting decent grade for the children in the community. Right now, the community is benefiting from another great school who gives them great results.
Thank you very much for that. Just before I go back to David again, I once again want to say that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides, and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out the latest releases? Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Now, David, I'm going to now pass that back to you. We've obviously heard that actually, in this particular school, in this particular trust, there has been a great improvement in the grades that they've seen. So they do have data to kind of support this. I guess in the argument that you might have would be actually, well, it's possible to get fantastic grades in schools that don't use SLANT, but I'm going to give you the chance to voice that yourself. What do you feel about
that? Firstly, that's great news for the students at that school, and well, any trust that turns around or any local authority that turns around a school is fantastic. I think I won't labour the point too much, but you're right. There are other methods that other schools have used to improve failing schools, and the outcomes for the students are important. I think I picked up on a couple of different phrases which people have used just during the last few contributions, and I'll try and pick up on them. I don't want to misrepresent or take out of context, but I think one of the things you said I found interesting was if the rest of your school weren't using SLANT and you were to, your students might find it crazy. Yeah. And I think I think that's kind of something that I think, for me, underlines the artificiality that slant has the potential of having. And I think that there are other ways that one can command the room through. I saw someone put it in the comments on the Twitter space about the enthusiasm for the subject, that there are things tied to the personality and to the way you hold yourself in the classroom that can produce the same results, but not have that same feeling of artificiality. And I'm not saying that your classroom would feel like that if you use slant, but I found it an interesting point that I would agree. I think if I were in a school and one person were to use slant, the kids would find it a bit odd. And yes, throughout the school it normalizes it, but I don't necessarily agree that normalizing something that on the surface is so unusual is positive for the kids overall. I think another thing that another speaker mentioned was that it makes, so one thing that I totally agree with, I would expect that SLANT would be much better for supply teachers. I'm not going to dispute that. I think there are huge issues with embedding supply into a school. I think that having that routine and that technique that they can step in and use, and similarly for ECTs, I can see how that would be advantageous. And I think that there are issues with supply, which I think needs to be reformed completely. But I don't think, and it ties in with the other sentence I picked up on, which is it makes teachers' lives easier. I don't think that should be the focus. I think teaching is a hard job to do right. There is a huge amount of emotional pressure. You know, we've got kids' lives in our hands. Their future outcomes can depend on stuff that we say and do. And I don't think that making, and I know that the speaker didn't say this, but I don't think making something easier should be a priority. That should be hoped for, and there are things that we can do, but it should always be weighed up against what is it giving to the students. And I think that slant can give an artificiality that in the long term, and as I mentioned right at the start, in terms of community cohesion and what they take out of the classroom with them, I don't think the stats bear that up as a positive.
Okay.
And the sorry.
I just wanted to interject there.
Yeah.
And once again, there's a lot of people listening today. The floor is open. If you want something to say, if you have something that's on your mind, just send a request and we can always add you into the chat. I'm just going to quickly interrupt there because there's a lot of kind of points to pick and you made some fantastic points. I think going back to the idea where, you know, it is, I guess, on the surface, when you first look into a school, if you're not in a school from that culture, once again, it could be unusual, and that is a good point to make there, I guess. I think it's because, you know, it depends where your expectations and your standards are of those students. You know, when you think about school, when you think back to your memories of school, you might actually find that actually, and maybe this is from a perspective of someone that is in a school that uses slant, but I think you'll find actually there was a lot of messing around that used to happen in the classroom, and there were a lot of times when actually the lesson wasn't focused around the learning, and I think it comes down to the same idea of why use slant then. And again, it comes down to the same points of maybe developing good habits that actually might seem artificial at the time, but actually those are important habits for people to learn and to use, because again, once they get to the area where they do need to have important meetings and stuff, slant builds up the good habits and the proactive behaviors that you need for that particular reason.
I'm going to cut in there if I may. I'm really sorry to interrupt. I'd argue they build up good habits for somebody who will be a follower, not a leader, and because they are traits of compliance, not of leadership. And I think that's something I think overall in education we have to be wary of, that we want to produce students who can go on and not have a limit, and these things are only important if we're expecting them to follow in others' footsteps rather than lead from the front. Apologies.
Yeah, that's fine. My question to you is then, what traits make someone a good leader, and why would slant be a hindrance to those traits?
I think that good traits are confidence in one's own ability, the ability to convey your own points well, I think the ability to speak up when something isn't right, to again, someone put it really well in the comments for this, somebody who can respect authority but push back against authoritarianism. And I think those are the kind of things where I don't think SLANT does fully allow that full expression. And I think you hit on the point yourself that, you know, in the past we've had students with great grades, low level disruption maybe, but also talking around the subject as well, because I don't think that again, another speaker said we should be in control of the pace of learning in the classroom and not the other way around. I just on a philosophical lesson disagree with that. I think that the student should be in charge of the pace of learning. We can guide that, but some students need to spend longer on a certain thought. Some students need to explore around the outside to develop that fully rounded sense of self. But successful people have the ability, not only in the classroom and in academia, but also in interrelationships with others, in the understanding nuance of empathy and things, which I think that the restorative approach, the nurture-based approach, which is the angle I'm coming from, I think places at the centre more than teach like a champion more broadly, which SLANT is, you know, the aspect we're discussing today.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I just want to say, I personally think, going on the idea of leadership again, I think that a good leader is also someone that is able to listen. A good leader is also someone that's able to, track the speaker when they speak. And I think that coming to the argument of SLANT, I think SLANT doesn't necessarily remove that. I think, sorry, Shoffer's opened his mic, so I'm guessing he has something to
Yeah. Right. Omar, I'm really sorry. I think it might be my phone, but I think just the feedback. You know, when other speaker is speaking, I'm unable to hear anything. It's only when you speak, I'm able to listen. So I'm not sure if this is a technical part from your part, or it's just my phone. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, that's right. So it's just when you speak, Omar, I can hear you, but when our colleagues speak, it's, I can't hear anything. Just a quick feedback to you. But I think again, just catching on from what you just mentioned about leadership, and I'm suspecting that there's a question mark on if we promote SLANT to our students, then we're doing something antithesis to promoting leadership skills. Am I correct?
Is that a question to David?
No, I'm asking because I couldn't hear David. Is that what the point that is made, that we SLANT somehow doesn't promote leadership skills that we expect to, right?
I would
So
say
look,
to represent. Sorry.
I sit around a lot of leadership group meetings and what have you, and I can tell you one thing that annoys the hell out of me, okay, is when people interrupt. Okay, just the simple things we take for granted. When anyone is speaking, okay, I attend the governance meeting, the board meeting, our various leadership group meeting, the middle leaders meeting. I think when is any meeting that is useful? You usually have a chair, okay, who chairs and coordinates the meeting. We have this called the meeting maestro. We have a host. We have agenda items set, and there's time allocated to the agenda item. And we've got to be quite succinct, because sometimes we can get carried away, right? And then agenda items can be missed, which can be quite frustrating. So a productive meeting, assuming again the agenda items are fit for purpose, is when someone is speaking. Sometimes we can get quite heated, okay? But we must allow others to speak. That means we need to listen. But then listening skill is something that we need to develop from young, and we need to teach our students that. We need to literally teach them that. We can't expect them to develop that by themselves. Some might, but mostly this is something that we need to teach. Interruption, okay? It's always annoying when someone interrupts. Certainly, sometimes those of us who's got a lot more authority in the meeting, the hippo effect, if you like, sometimes they interrupt. But we sort of address that in our organization, that actually, let the person finish before the chair says, okay, you can speak. So actually, it does promote great leadership quality. I've observed my board members, how they sit actually in the meeting. And funny enough, they clasp their hand, a lot of them, as they're speaking, right? A lot of us, we go to media training. We actually pay a lot of money to get media training, right? So in the media training, one of the things they say to you, actually, it is better that you don't fidget with your hand when you speak, because it's a distraction. So SLANT actually does promote a lot of skills that you need to be effective leaders.
Can I just say, but if you can't hear one of the other speakers, you might want to restart the Twitter app and then rejoin the space as a speaker, and then hopefully that should resolve it. It's happened before.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. So I think going back to the main idea here, have we lost? Oh no, yeah. Going back to the main idea here is, I guess, some people, some arguments of SLANT for the benefit is that actually it helps develop good listening habits and improves comprehension on academic level. But here, I guess, Shoff is arguing that actually it does support leadership, because those are also good skills that are seen in good leaders. What do you believe are the limitations of SLANT in this regard?
I think my main concerns would be that it's such a thin section of it. I think that the idea that people can only listen if they have their hands clasped, if they're facing forward, if they're tracking the teacher, I actually think is quite destructive on a societal level, because it's continuing this pushing out of neurodiversity and other SEMH issues to the side. So I know lots of neurodiverse people for whom sketching and doodling is actually helping them listen, because their brain is working so quickly that actually distracting it through one thing is helping them listen. And I think perpetuating that idea that this is what listening looks like, I think we need a societal shift on anyway. And I think that as teachers in the classroom, we should be working the room after we've given our deliberate instruction, and we can pick up on those students who we think need extra support or might not have listened properly. And again, you'll have to say, but are there ever occasions where a child is sitting using SLANT, but they're just disengaged? They're doing all of the things that are requested, but actually they've been daydreaming. Does that ever happen in your classroom?
I think it is possible to happen in the classroom. I think I personally alleviate this quite a lot by because I use a lot of cold calling and a lot of mini whiteboards. So I think for me, it becomes very obvious when someone's not paying attention, and that there is I have to therefore say, make sure you're paying attention. I'm going to come back to you in a second. I'm going to re-ask the same question. So it gives that student the chance to, number one, listen the second time it's said, but number two, it enforces a kind of expectation in that class. Yeah. Where students do need to pay attention when I'm talking, because I'm going to come back and I'm going to cold call. So, did you have something to add there? Also,
I think that's a very, it's working now. I did actually leave and it's working. I can hear people. Thank you. I think that's a very good question. I think again, it comes back to the good teachers and what we expect to see from good teachers in the classroom look like. So you're right. I mean, what are the two alternatives? There are two alternatives there. You've got a situation where there's a low-level disruption, people are fidgeting, and then you can ask the same question at that environment, at that scenario. Or you've got a situation where actually people are listening without fidgeting, without multitasking. But a great teacher then would know who the students are sitting in front of them. So for example, we've got this acronym called SAF. That stands for Sitting, Asking, Feedback. So we expect our teachers, and we highly recommend our teachers to do, know your students. If you know there are certain students that they require over and above everyone else extra attention from you for various reasons. Okay, know where they're sitting, provide them feedback over and above anyone else, and ask them, encourage them. Now, on the question of asking, as a great teacher that you are, if you want to now cold call, or if you want to now ask a question to check for understanding against somebody who may have some levels of challenges with the way they receive information. Now, actually, I would argue that when you expect the whole class to listen to that child speaking, you're actually encouraging that child to speak confidently and not to be scared of someone, making fun out of them. Often you would hear, or heckle them. So creating that environment that promotes respect for someone speaking when they're speaking, I would actually encourages those people who might otherwise be quite scared to speak. Just a small example.
I'm just gonna interrupt here. I will give you a chance to respond, David, but I also we have Tamina here who's been waiting patiently. Tamina, did you have something? You can introduce yourself, and did you have something that you wanted to add to the conversation?
Hi, Omar. Thanks for inviting me. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm an exec head in Community Schools Trust. So I oversee Forest Gate, Cumberland, and a UTC in Norwich. I was previously head to Forest Gate. So I thought I would give the angle from someone who has experienced life in school without SLANT in a top performing school, Forest Gate. So it's been in the top 50 nationally for a number of years. Number one in the borough, without SLANT. And in 2019, when I became head, we introduced SLANT in the school. And it took a little bit of soul searching for me to justify why we would do that across a school where outcomes were really good, and arguably the teachers, taught well because the outcomes suggested so. Can you hear me, by the way? Or am I just speaking?
Yeah, I can hear you personally.
Okay, fine, I'll carry on. And so I think, first of all, we had to before I became head, I'd been at Forest Gate for about 8 years, and in various roles, and part of that was teaching and learning and staff development and learning walks and things like that. So I had a pretty good idea of what the climate was like, what the quality of teaching and learning was like, because we've got an open door culture, walking in and out. So I kind of knew, but I think it came to a point in 2019 where we'd visited really great schools, and it took a level of recognition that actually, it could be even better. It's not like we weren't good. Clearly we were, because the results were good. But we could be even better. It could be even better. And that recognition of low-level disruption existing, or it being quite varied depending on the teacher, we had to recognize that. So we introduced SLANT across the school. And I think, Doug Lemov, in the third edition of Teach Like a Champion, he explains it to a greater deal and focuses on habits of attention and social behavior, which really resonated with me and the teachers across our schools. And it's this idea that if you're not, you could create a climate in the classroom where there is a bit of heckling, a bit of mocking, a bit of banter, usually among the louder, more confident kids. But if we're using something, it doesn't have to be SLANT, it could be anything really, but we've opted to take this approach. If we're using something that promotes a climate where when a child speaks, they are met with attention from their peers, appreciation, signs of respect, as opposed to not listening to them, ignoring them, their body language suggesting they don't care about what they're saying. Yes, teacher relationships are really important, but the influence that peers have on each other is so much more important and so much more powerful in creating a sense of identity, belonging, motivation for those students to do really well in the class. And I think that's how Lemov tells it, and that really resonates for our students. And the last thing, in my experience across the schools that we've introduced it to, it's really well embedded in Forest Gate now, for example, and Cumberland. In my experience, the students with additional needs, our neurodiverse students, they excel with this. There's exceptions, so there's some with really great needs that we'd have to make reasonable adjustments for, but on the whole, the vast majority of our students with additional needs, it's a safe thing for them to be able to be successful in those classes. And again, the outcomes for our SEND students speak for themselves as well on that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Tamina. I'm going to give David the chance to respond to that, but I'm also going to I have to play devil's advocate here. And I want to go back to something that David said at the very beginning, and I feel like a lot of people wasn't here. David, if you don't mind, there was some statistics that you read out in terms of areas and schools that people did use SLANT. I just think it'll be a very interesting kind of point to bring back up into the conversation at this point.
Yeah, no problem. Strangely enough, I did look at Forest Gate School stats for this anyway, and Forest Gate School. I don't know what year you introduced SLANT. Actually, that would be quite interesting to know. What year did you introduce SLANT at Forest Gate?
It was 2019.
Cool. So the stats that there were is actually between 2015 and 2019 on antisocial behaviour in the community, around within a mile of the school. I looked at all the schools that talked about SLANT, and one of the most prominent ones in Wembley saw between 2015 and 2019 a 19% rise in antisocial behaviour around the school. Taking Forest Gate Community School actually saw an 8% drop in that time, and if at that time it wasn't using SLANT, it doesn't go against my suggestion that actually when we use a different model other than SLANT, instead of seeing superficial compliance, we actually can transform a student's approach to their behaviour holistically. And then a couple of schools based in Yorkshire saw a 30% drop in antisocial behaviour within 1 mile of the school. Another saw a 24% drop. A school in Corby saw a 19% drop in antisocial behaviour. So really, while I totally take on board correlation versus causation and all of the issues with statistics, my suggestion is that with SLANT and with these are the routines you follow. We're embedding a routine, but we're not embedding a change in behaviour beyond the classroom, which a restorative approach focused on changing the causes of behaviour can actually change the students' behaviour out in the community as well. And to as I say, I've only got the data from 2015 to 2019, so I'm not going to impugn Forest Gate or anything like that. And it's fantastic to see anybody who is improving lives for students, whatever methods they're using, I think is amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that is quite an interesting point. Obviously, it doesn't quite apply for Forest Gate Community School because they introduced SLANT after the measures was made, and they do achieve some very, very fantastic grades. I think I've already kind of made the point that could it not be that restorative approaches can be used hand in hand with SLANT? I know that in my school, for example, we have restorative conversations which kind of build into that practice, and you did say that it's kind of you don't believe that it could truly be a restorative approach if SLANT is being used. But I want to throw that at Tamina and maybe Shafiq if they had a comment to make here.
Sorry, what was the question, Omar?
So the question is, obviously, we've got these statistics where in a mile radius, you've seen an increase in antisocial behaviour. Obviously, we're not sure when these schools did introduce SLANT. So as we could see, if Forest Gate really introduced it at later than the statistics actually show. But what is the argument is that I believe the argument was that it doesn't instill a kind of a wider kind of habitual improvement in the students. What is your comments on that?
I think those statistics, correlation or causation, it was before 2019. I think David said it dropped. So there's an inference there, but I think it's too limited to indicate anything significant there at all. I take the point, but I don't think that it's robust enough to say anything about the influences of SLANT. What I can say is that the culture that this particular technique cultivates in the classroom on a whole school level as well as an individual level means that students feel successful and feel motivated and feel like they can achieve, you know. And I've seen that across schools, the schools that have been using them, and feedback, student feedback, even feedback, people really it resonates with them because they felt the benefits of slant, and they remember what it was like before that. And again, let me just reiterate, is, you know, slant is there. What did we do before it came along? We had our various strategies to get a whole class's attention, for example. You know, as a teacher myself, I would say something like 3, 2, 1, eyes on me. I know lots of teachers used to use that. Or we've got our different variations. Students had to go from class to class and learn what that particular teacher of that subject wanted from them when they called for attention. And for a student with additional needs, for example, that might have been slightly more difficult for them. And for, you know, the rest of the students, they would have had to still learn all those different ways. Whereas this particular strategy, taken up by the whole school, meant that it was one strategy, one expectation. It was crystal clear expectations, which meant, again, a degree of feelings, knowing what is expected of them. In the community, you know, the bigger idea is those pro-social behaviours, that it's deliberately teaching, that particular students from disadvantaged backgrounds won't necessarily be deliberately taught, whereas students from wealthier backgrounds would pick up on those things. And so I think from our communities, something like this, teaching pro-social behaviours, particularly helps them as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that Shof, your mic kept coming on. Was there something that you wanted to add here?
No, I think Tamina covered it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to take this chance to once again say that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides, and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out on this chance. Visit johncatbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Now, guys, we literally have about 7 minutes left of this conversation. It has been a fantastic conversation. We've encountered some statistics here, and I guess the argument that Tamina's making is that we are trying to, by using SLANT, the idea is that you're trying to build up proactive behaviors. I'm going to give you, I'm just going to pose another question to David here. I think we've kind of exhausted that kind of point there because we've kind of gone a bit back and forwards, and I guess it comes down to your own interpretation of it. I think a big argument for SLANT is the use in terms of SEND. I want to pose you the question here. Do you maybe have a suggestion on how SLANT could be maybe adapted in these type of situations, David? If you was, I know you're obviously a SLANT skeptic, but if you was in a school that told you did have to use SLANT, do you have any kind of ideas on how you could maybe use SLANT in those type of situations? Or do you believe that inherently the system of SLANT and using it as a tool is just flawed and there's no balance there?
So I think one question that that I had that came up, just to put in there, is when you're teaching SLANT initially, do you teach what each of the letters are, why each of those is used, what it represents as this pro-social interaction, and then do you return to it as you do other learning to reinforce why you track the teacher, what does that mean in wider society, and so on? Is that something you do in your classroom?
Can I come in here?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think perhaps we should have discussed the whys behind why we do what we do. You're 100% right. This is something that we're very conscious of, and we encourage our teachers frequently to remind students why we do it. So it's not a matter of just follow our instruction. We do try our best as frequently as possible to explain the whys. So, and I think this is very important. So, and you see over time, even the students themselves, particularly the older lot, when we initially introduced SLANT, the younger lot, year 7th and the year 8th, they were very compliant. But we found some challenges and difficulties with the year 10th and the year 11th. But with time, as you explain the whys, you first of all, there's a trust behind the whole initiative that you foster, and then students, they start to get the reason and they're more compliant. So I think pushing the whys is extremely important for students to understand the reason behind not interrupting or listening attentively, or tracking the speaker, if you like.
Thank you. In answer to your question, Omer, I just wanted that context. I think for me, during lockdown 2, it was the first time as a teacher I felt I was doing net harm to some of our students. The enforced being on for live lessons throughout the full day, I saw the mental health of some of my students decrease and felt I contributed to that. For me, I do think that there are certain neurodiverse students for whom there is harm caused by the masking that SLANT does. There are estimates that up to 1 million people in the UK, up to 1.2 million people in the UK have undiagnosed neurodiversity. So just because we have somebody with an EHCP or with something, it doesn't mean that there aren't other students struggling. And I feel that being enforced to follow a specific routine when I believe my behaviour management approach works better for my students, for my teaching style, I don't feel able to incorporate that into my teaching and still be an effective teacher. I think I'd be doing my students in front of me a disservice by compromising my teaching to meet an edict that I struggle to get on board with anyway. So I don't feel I could work in that school. Now, that is not me saying that I don't see why SLANT might work for other teachers, why it might be easier for ECTs or might be easier for cover teachers, but it's a compromise I wouldn't want to make in my own practice to do my job how I feel is best.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I guess that's the whole point of the conversation. Shof, you had something to add. We do need to start drawing the conversation to an end here. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give Shof, Tamina, and David, if you had last comments to make, now's the time to kind of make those last comments.
Yeah, I think my last point really is just a reiteration of the fundamental spirit behind whether it's SLANT or another Q or we use is why we're doing it. The reason we're doing it because when we walk into a classroom, we want to see a conducive, effective learning environment, disruption-free. Now, whatever you want to use, whatever strategy you want to use, my critical question is, do you have a classroom that is disruption-free? Because if you don't have a classroom that is disruption-free, then the question about learning is a valid one. How well are they learning? And what is our job as an adult, as teachers in the classroom? We need to facilitate learning. And how can we create an environment for that learning? And finally, I would actually argue back in terms of teachers who actually left our organization. Many of them have come back, and one of the common complaints they've made is that, look, they said the behavior of students in the classroom did not allow me and my hard work to be executed, did not allow me to teach properly, and that frustrated me a lot. Okay, that's one of the reasons they've cited for coming back. So again, I will propagate. I'll strongly request colleagues to think about, if you're not getting the correct environment in the classroom, you need to think how you get that, whether it's using SLANT or any other strategy. Of course, there are many strategies, out there. As long as you have the environment, fair enough.
Okay, I'm just gonna, Tamina, I do want to give you, if you could be really quick, I'll give you a chance to have your last say before I give it back to David, who was our official guest today. So I do want to give him a chance to have maybe the last word here. Tamina, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, 10 seconds. If you want to see SLANT in action in an organic way, come visit Forest Gate School. We've got a school leaders meeting coming up as well, open morning. I'll post it at some point in the next term. It's coming up, so come and visit. If you can't make it, get in touch and you can see SLANT in action if you want to be convinced or otherwise. That's it from me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tamina. And David, one last closing. I'll give you the chance to have a last closing comment here.
I just wanted to say thank you for putting the show on, because I think EduTwitter can sometimes get a bit fraught with only 140 characters to try and get nuance across. So having this opportunity to explore it in more depth is really appreciated, and I really appreciated hearing all the other contributors.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to Mina and Shof. If you wanted to come on at any point to be a guest on the show, you're more than welcome. This has been the Sunday Social here today, and again, we've left with the question, SLANT, engaging minds on mandatory listening. That's your chance to think that through. We have, just very last point, had Paul Foster here in the comments. He's done a little poll, and it's come out that most people are encouraging him to use SLANT in his class next year. That's maybe a little closing thought there. Guys, thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed the show.
Thank you. What a fantastic show. Our next show is at 1 p.m. Join us on our website, ttradio.org. We're leading the education conversation. See you there.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.